is no better treat than welcoming back alumni to the school. And an even better treat is to welcome another Omar to the school. but really, it's special. I remember I had Omar in class actually almost 2012, right? And, we didn't keep in touch, but I was keeping in touch with his career through LinkedIn, actually. And I was seeing the progression, and every time I was amazed. And when actually I started this job at the AI in Business University, I would say, who are the people we would like to have? And I thought that Omar would be a fantastic person to bring to campus to share with us what he's gone through and what are the challenges ahead with his company. So we're really thrilled to have you here. I thought maybe to start us off, maybe you could, this is the week where we're speaking about legal tech. So this is really perfect timing in that sense, but we'll come to that a bit later. But first, maybe it would be good to share with us a little bit of the arc of your career from your time here as a student to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's great to be back. My career, so when I was in all of your shoes, I was starting my first company while I was in grad school, and that was my chance to make every mistake I make, I would say. I ended up moving to Brooklyn and living with 4 software developers for 2 years. I wouldn't recommend that to anybody. And, we started by building a product where we were essentially the user, and that product worked really well. Didn't have any business model. So then we eventually pivoted to another product where a middle-aged woman became the primary user. And we just made a lot of assumptions about what that user needed that were totally inaccurate, very logical, but very inaccurate. And so I think the biggest lesson I took away from that startup was just the importance of actually listening to your customer, whoever you're building your technology for, which is kind of a cliche, but when you live through it and see a lot of software code that never ends up kind of benefiting anybody, it's a very painful lesson. So we did have an exit, but it was more of a soft landing type of exit, anything significant financially. However, I learned so much that I was really eager to give it another shot. And one of my friends, when I was at Columbia, had actually been doing his PhD in computer science, specializing in artificial intelligence at the time. He'd actually been one of the original inventors of IBM Watson, which back then was a really big deal. And so we had been trading ideas, and he received some money from the government to commercialize some of his research. So without really knowing anything, I left the job that was the company that acquired my first company. I just really didn't want to make the mistake I made the first time around. So I interviewed 200 customers before writing a single line of code. And it actually wasn't my legal background. It was just being in New York. Every third person you meet is a lawyer. So we discovered this problem and ended up building a product. We were profitable within the first quarter, and it was never, up and to the right. We had a lot more success. Exited that company in 2021, and then I formed Eudia shortly after leaving Relativity.
Great. So now to Eudia, can you tell us first a little bit more about the name? Where does the name come from?
Yeah. So prior to law school and business school, I studied philosophy, and remember having this really aha moment when I was reading Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, where he talks about this concept of eudaimonia, which is essentially people achieving their highest good. And so the book is all about how do you achieve this state of eudaimonia, where when you're under deathbed and you look back in your life, you feel like you've lived a good life. And I was going through this kind of, again, like the world's smallest violence playing right now, because after I suddenly made all this money and was feeling very lost, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do after selling my last company. And then it really just occurred to me that whatever I did next needed to have a mission attached to it, because my last company, candidly, didn't really have one. It was just about trying to build a product that actually delivered value in a successful business. And when I really stepped back and thought about legal as an industry, it struck me as maybe competing with healthcare for one of the most broken industries in our society, where today 90% of people who need a lawyer can't afford one. The average American's a single legal event away from bankruptcy. And if you look at businesses, like even as a startup, we paid $100,000 in legal fees for our Series A for work that I now know can be done for $1,000. So if you think about the impact of taking $99,000 for a small business like ours and at scale, again, AI may have been hallucinating, but before I came here, I just asked AI what percentage of the GDP is actually sort of contributing towards some form of legal fees. And taxes that we pay to lawyers, and it was 2.5%. So it's a huge amount, which if you think about what it could mean to really eliminate that friction, both for businesses to invest more in growth and innovation and for consumers to have a much better access to legal services, it felt like a very worthwhile mission.
So maybe now going to a little bit the value proposition and the legal landscape. Can you map up for us a little bit the legal landscape? How is the industry organized? How does Eudia fit in within the offerings? We are seeing a lot of Gen AI tools that are rising as well. What's the unique value proposition that Eudia delivers? And maybe we can put it in the context of this week's news with the announcement by Anthropic to launch actually a legal tool. And that has triggered all kinds of questions about software in general, not just legal software. So maybe we can have this broad, essentially, description of the landscape.
Yeah, definitely. And I won't hold back. I have a lot of controversial views, so I'll just be very open. So one of the things that really led to the creation of Eudia was a view that I began to form that AI is not the future of software; it's actually the future of labor. And having spent the last decade going really deep with a lot of general counsels and chief legal officers, one thing that I observed was 98% of the budget typically goes to humans, some form of internal headcount, law firms, services, not to software. So my last company was fighting 100 other companies, now 10,000 other companies for the 2% of the budget going to software. But within the software landscape, there is sort of the contract lifecycle management tools, e-discovery. You have these, depending on the specific function, and then some things that are broader, like matter management, e-billing, et cetera. But really, all of those are barely touching the budget. And if you actually observe how it works today for most corporate legal departments, it's almost like the technology lives on one shelf, and then every lawyer is spending their time and energy with, again, a very, very different set of activities, which is where all the time and money and value is being generated. So it really occurred to me that no amount of putting AI on top of the 2% of the budget would ever fundamentally change anything. And what really would be required to achieve our mission would be to really go after at least ask ourselves, what would it mean to offer a 10x better alternative to where the 98% of the budget goes, and thinking about it from that perspective.
Okay.
It's not exactly. I answer your question.
No, that's great. That's great. So that's what it comes as the high level, let's say, goal of going after that part of the labor. Now, I would say, how does, let's say, maybe that's the other question there. What's the unique value in your mind? Like, what's the differentiator of Eudia versus other solutions like right now? And how do you feel about these, let's say, larger players such as Anthropic or OpenAI coming after this big part of the budget?
Yeah. So I think partly, I'll just share a little bit of background of what I've learned from 10 years of working really closely with a lot of Fortune 500 legal teams and in-house lawyers, because I do think, again, going back to my biggest learning of just paying attention to really understanding your customer deeply, there are some pretty fundamental differences between an in-house attorney and a law firm attorney. And a lot of legal tech, even the name implies, as long as you're a lawyer, you should have the same product. But I really don't think that's true. And especially now in a world where we can start building software so much more quickly in a highly personalized way, nobody should settle for some out-of-the-box tool that wasn't designed for someone exactly like you. So when you think about just first, what's the difference between the in-house lawyer and the law firm lawyer, what I've come to appreciate is the in-house lawyer is almost like a business person who happens to know how to navigate the law, as opposed to a law firm lawyer where generally you're hiring a law firm lawyer so that you can actually get the best possible legal advice, flag every possible risk. And then as an in-house lawyer, you take that, you say, okay, I know obviously if I was guarding against every risk, I might follow all this advice, but in reality, these are the 3 risks out of the 10 that actually matter to me based on the context of my business. And so I'm going to now interpret this where I don't care about the 80-page memo. I just want the punchline of what are the 3 things I actually need to do for the answer to be yes, not no, right? And a lot of the focus of the in-house team is to really enable the business to grow. And most of my friends, even from law school, I saw going through this transition where it was a period of adaptation to go from typically get trained at a law firm, you then go in-house if you go in-house. But there's a lot of things I observed that my friends had to unlearn that they learned at a law firm. Law firms provide great training, but it's not the same setting as when you're in-house. So one of the things that we really spend a lot of time on is really deeply understanding, and I ask every customer this still, why are you investing in AI? Why are you suddenly so interested in meeting people like me? And really unpacking that and like almost obsessing over why, right? Because there's kind of this sudden change post ChatGPT where a lot of people are just not even sure why, I think, to be honest, but at least I try to push them to understand the rationale. And what I really discovered is there's generally two primary motivations for the chief legal officers that I work with that are actually extremely different from whatever the motivations of law firms might be. We don't sell to law firms, so I don't know their motivations. But for the buyer that I spend all my time with and I can talk to or speak on behalf of, the two main motivations were, number one, how do you eliminate friction? And really, when you think about the role of the in-house counsel, if today it takes 17 days for the legal team to review your contract, how do I get that to be 1 day or 1 hour, right? Like as little time as possible so that my colleagues who are driving revenue can start to really appreciate legal. They don't feel like we're a bottleneck or slowing down growth. And it's a very, very hard job for the in-house counsel because they have to navigate this speed risk trade-off constantly where the business wants them to move fast. They even want to move fast themselves, but they also need to make sure they're protecting the company. And that's their main job is to protect the company from risk. So I think one kind of broad value proposition that I discovered was if you can use AI to really eliminate friction, that's quite significant. The other value proposition was around not so much on the eliminating friction side, but how do you actually use the law as a weapon for offense and to get some kind of competitive advantage? Maybe the most interesting examples I have here are the work that we've done in litigation. It's actually fascinating. I thought we would, be here to eliminate the low value work and document review or things like that. But actually, the most common and fascinating use cases of our technology in litigation have been how do we actually do the impossible? And when you pair our technology with an expert human, the AI can now go through 10 pages of very lengthy depositions in real time during a trial, find out inconsistencies with what the witness is saying compared to what they said 7 years ago on page 500 of one deposition. So it really starts to get into some really, really interesting, and that's on the litigation side. On the even commercial side, one of our customers recently used our platform to not only streamline the low-hanging fruit contracting review, but actually identify 50 basis points of margin because there's so much rich data in the contracts. If you think about contracts basically tell you who are your customers, who are your vendors. When you overlay that with financial and operational data, you can figure out which of my contract terms actually lead to the fastest sales cycles, get me sued the most often, cause the greatest impact to margin. So there's a really, really interesting set of opportunities around how do you go way beyond the low-hanging fruit. But to get your question about how does this differ from a ChatGPT or Anthropic, they're still ultimately building a horizontal set of capabilities. And even though these agents can do incredible things that increasingly are taking on work that was previously done by humans, to get to a level of depth with any of these workflows, it typically requires a combination of a lot of proprietary data and just deeper understanding of what's the problem statement, which typically comes from access to some kind of institutional knowledge.
Great. So maybe to follow up on that, maybe also if in your answer you can mention what solutions do you use in the background, which models do you use in the background, but also when you think, can you walk us through a few of your early customers and what were actually some of these indeed processes that were redesigned thanks to your solutions, and how do you see your offerings going forward, and how do you get your customers actually to trust you to be able to share all of that internal data?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I think one other maybe just addition to the last question, but also as a segue to the current question, the technical problem that we observed that all of our customers faced was that the knowledge that's needed, whether it's a new human who's joining the team or a new AI agent who wants to join the team, that knowledge is currently distributed across a variety of SaaS applications and trapped in people's heads. So really more than even the AI piece, what we've built is actually what we call a knowledge platform. And that's something that connects to all of their current data sources. And we've really spent a lot of time on the technical side. Like my co-founder built search at Apple from scratch. We have a lot of engineers who have built knowledge graphs and knowledge platforms. And why that's relevant is we've actually learned that even though AI looks amazing to somebody who has no idea about the subject matter, when you show it to an expert, they're usually like, this isn't very good. Sounds good at first, but then you actually dig in. There's a lot of problems with the analysis. And so we basically learned from that, and we even tell our customers now, and I'll bring you to an example in a minute, to basically set expectations where we're building a brain for each company, we call it, and that brain is really the amalgamation of all of this institutional knowledge that was previously inaccessible to them. We can't really just build that like ex ante. We have to have a mechanism to continually build it and improve it. And so, just to give you a very, very concrete example, we have a customer where, and a lot of our customers have this problem, a lot of the lawyers spend time reviewing marketing communications. And depending on the industry, there may be a different regulatory risk. If it's oil and gas, maybe it's greenwashing. If it's financial services, it might be a different risk, right? So they have regulatory risks that they're concerned about. And what a lot of the lawyers do internally are review marketing communications, typically from scratch. Maybe they have a playbook. They definitely usually have some kind of guidelines from the FTC or DOJ if they're consulting. So we did a proof of value recently with a new customer where we had 3 weeks. We said, okay, our goal is to take some of these inputs like the FTC guide and maybe a few past examples, and we're going to see if we can streamline this process and really demonstrate what this brain actually looks like and what it means. And so we said, please don't judge us by the first output because that'll be the worst output. Judge us by the third output, and that'll be given to you in the third week of this 3-week process. And so sure enough, the machine spit it out the first output. The lawyer said, this is horrible. I give it a 5 out of 10. We said, okay. And obviously this is all baked into the product, but tell us why it's horrible. He said, well, the machine flagged this statement as low risk and it's actually high risk. And we said, okay, tell us more. What makes it high risk? He said, well, one of my competitors got sued 3 weeks ago for saying something like this. I said, okay, great. That's information that was living in your head. We now have trained the machine that this is actually the right way to think about that particular risk. And this process continued. And by the third week, we were not only getting an F1 score of 93%, an efficiency gain of 55%, but this customer had so much of this work, they actually sent a lot of the overflow work to law firms. So we're saving them now $4 million a year on that overflow work. And even more interestingly, this is an example of a customer where the chief legal officer happens to hate adverbs. It's not legally right or wrong, but our machine and the brain for this customer will never use an adverb. And so the lawyer starts to appreciate that even subjectively, the language and the calibration of risk is actually highly tuned to how this company actually operates. And it gets better every time anybody in the company uses it. So we're now moving towards a model where it actually is becoming self-service, where the marketing team, upon creating these communications, doesn't need to send it to legal and wait a few days for them to review it. They can actually start to get the brain to analyze it. And there's built-in mechanisms where, obviously, if it reaches a certain threshold of risk, maybe the legal team does want to review it, but they can actually drive what they see in a much more thoughtful, intentional way.
Okay, thank you. So I guess at this stage, maybe I would like to pass it on to Jody to bring a different perspective here.
Well, thank you, and thank you so much for being here. It's just absolutely thrilling and educational. I just have a quick follow-up question there before I turn to the legal side. You were saying that it's still very sort of bespoke programming, at least at the beginning, to get it to then sort of self-adapt to the environment it's designed for. But with a lot of products and learning, you then go meta on that and figure out your sort of one business model in a box about, we do this. Could you ever imagine a point where you get the AI to replace your own guys? And so it really is back to, these large software companies that can come in, create one thing, and then you customize it for your own business, right? So they don't actually need you to come in because you designed AI to do the initial process of customizing it. It teaches them how to do it. You give them, they themselves, the lawyers and the business people, put the data in, and then the thing starts training, and then it asks for what it needs, and it comes back. Is that, Star Trek, or is that next year?
No, that's actually, and I think this is, maybe something we'll talk about in a few minutes, but we actually did acquire 2 companies, both of which were legal services companies. So legal professionals who have a lot of experience doing the kind of work that our customers do, and many of them were already acting as extensions of some of these in-house teams to do that work. And after the acquisitions, again, the biggest thing that changed was, to the extent they were billing hourly, that ended, and now it became a fixed fee or output-based model, which aligns our incentives with our customer and encourages us to actually use technology wherever possible. But the really fascinating thing about this is, first of all, having those people as part of our team has been phenomenal because we can really go deep and truly understand exactly how humans are doing this work today. So from a product development standpoint, it's been phenomenal. From a sort of business thesis perspective, by simply making that change of let's go from hourly to fixed fee and now turn on the AI, we've seen our gross margins for this kind of business go from 30% to 80%. Wow. The customer is getting the contracts back twice as fast, like very, very quickly. So it's a win-win. But to your point, I think, the reality is, and I really am an optimist. I'm actually very excited about all the jobs that are being created, which I want to get into. So this is not all doomsday, but I do think most legal work and frankly professional services work and knowledge work as we know it, I believe, is asymptotically approaching zero. And so there's no point in kind of pretending like that's not the case. I think there's actually a lot of new work that's emerging that's actually way more rewarding, impactful. In our company's case, the net number of people we're hiring is greater, even though we've automated most software development. And now on the legal side, we're following a very similar path. So I do think there's going to be, again, like anything's possible, but my personal prediction is there's going to be as many or more jobs. It's just the jobs themselves are going to change a lot. But just to answer the question, like we basically are unabashedly trying to figure out if there's a human in the loop, that human's job is no longer doing the work. It's literally kind of watching wherever the AI is failing, correcting that, building a mind, we call it, right? So that essentially they're never manually doing the legal work they used to do. They're training this mind to do it for them. And we haven't reached the point that the human's not needed anymore, but the amount of time that they previously spent compared to now, it's just quite dramatic how much time is being reduced.
And you do anticipate at some point we'll achieve full separation and liftoff, where we're consumers of the product of AI, and the era in which this was just a transition from human knowledge to AI being trained to think like a human, and then at some point nobody's thinking like a human anymore, and we don't even know what they're thinking, and it's just producing the product we need.
So I mean, there's maybe two slight takes I have on that. One is around just from a pure like regulatory perspective, there will probably be some non-technical impediments that I see to a future like that. I also think, from one of the things that I asked myself before starting this company was, in a world that everything that can be automated will be automated and more things can be automated, what can't be automated? And at the top of the list was trust. I think trust is actually a very human-to-human sort of concept and experience. And so even if the human's not strictly needed, I think there's a lot of value in having humans involved in the process. But I think the other thing is, like, if we're really honest with ourselves, law firms became a $1 trillion industry by bundling cognitive services. So there's this old Jim Barksdale quote, there's two ways to make money in business, bundling and unbundling. And if you think about what law firms have done, the reason they became so big, I would argue, is that they basically bundled cognitive services. And I would argue a huge percentage of the work that goes to law firms is not actually even legal advice, but they happen to have 80% of it is just coming through emails to find information, and they were getting paid at $2,000 an hour. That's not a bad business. So I think what we're going to see is, at a minimum, the work that really is, which today I'd argue is not anywhere close to 100%, but I also think it might be greater than 50% at this point. The work that really can be automated, and that it feels borderline unethical to charge people that much for work that you now know can be automated if you have a duty to your client, right? I think that part should be automated. And now the human ideally spends more and more time on, what do you do with the 5 hours you have back in your day? We call that the AI dividend. And some of our customers even give their teams, like, one of their KPIs for the team is describe how you're going to use your AI dividend. But the answer to that question is fascinating, because a lot of times it's not even strictly legal work, but it's basically, I want to really deeply understand the product that my team or company is selling. I want to go much deeper. I want to be able to think about creative ways to proactively figure out, I know the CEO mentioned something about China. I'm not sure we can operate in China. Let me do some research on that. So I think it starts to become just adding value. That's not simply summarizing contracts in an M&A due diligence data room or whatever we used to consider the job of the lawyer.
So I think the idea of trust is appealing. It's particularly appealing to a lawyer because a lawyer's self-conception is a fiduciary and a trustworthy person, and you need to put in face time, and the client wants to see you and not somebody else. That's very, very hallowed tradition. But I wonder whether the time will come where the technology is more trusted than the person. And right, we're already at a time where people are saying, well, did you try it? Did you try some non-human help here because you could catch stuff you didn't? This is in medicine as well. It's like, I don't just trust my doctor anymore. I want to know what my doctor's doing with the technology, what kind of software you have, what kind of AI you have here, because you could be missing the lump or you could be missing the research that you didn't know about. No human can brute force it like AI can. So I wonder whether at some point, even the trust part of at least of the analysis, right? They don't need to see your face anymore. You've in other words, you've kind of mooted yourself out by instilling in them, with good reason, trust in the product you just gave them, and now they actually don't think any human can compete with that.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things that's really hard to like probably appreciate in the abstract. But one thing I am seeing is, so if you think about knowledge, like speaking of knowledge work, which is really the topic, really, I think there's two types of knowledge: knowledge that's commoditized and knowledge that's rare. And as the amount of commoditized knowledge gets automated, the relative value of rare knowledge starts to go up a lot. What I'm finding really interesting, and I can give some more examples, but at a very, very high level, the jobs that I'm alluding to that are being created, and maybe the new type of trust that can be generated, really comes from how can you actually, as a human, harness and accumulate rare knowledge, which is actually something that, with the assistance of AI, I believe we now have an opportunity to do in a way that is really exciting and is actually going way beyond. But it requires, like, right now, it's almost imagination. And then as you start to see examples of it, it becomes more real. But I think you can earn trust from, like, if ultimately the job of the lawyer is to help your client and promote their interests, some of which is whatever they asked you for to give legal advice on, and some of which might just be, I'm going to build trust because I also know that you like anchovy pizza. I ordered anchovy pizza before you got here, and that's a way of also building a trust in a relationship. There's a lot of ways. I think if you know fundamentally what your client is trying to achieve, and you have the ability to harness this rare knowledge to go above and beyond, it's a very, very exciting job, and I think something that clients are happy to pay a lot for.
Yeah, I do think that one of the values lawyers place a primacy on, and I think clients do, particularly at that sort of rare knowledge, and you, having studied philosophy, know this, is wisdom, right? Wisdom can't be just reduced to a data set. And it's usually, you want some actor that's very experienced, that's been through it with you, been through it with other people, has a huge sort of perspective on the field, and there's no substitute for their judgment. We want that person in the room. And the question is whether that becomes the singular value that the human is adding, or whether AI could get to the point where actually it's not just knowledgeable, it's wise, it's got judgment, it's not a clear yes or no, and I trust you, I don't trust him, but maybe I don't trust both of you, now I trust the AI in there. So I think it's something lawyers are thinking a lot about. What is that value added? And they don't think it's that grunt work that the first year associate does. But let me move you to something specific about the law world. So if we think about the law ecosystem, and particularly at law schools like Columbia and others, the vast majority of our students are going into corporate law and working at corporate law firms. There's really not a direct line into in-house counsel, as you know. The law schools train to put the law firms in a position to train. The law firms train, or the law schools train at abstract level of legal reasoning and some basic knowledge, and then the law firms actually teach you practical stuff about how to put that knowledge to work in the field. And then, if you're interested in going in-house, then, as you say, they're going to unlearn some things and learn some stuff they didn't learn there. But you can't just walk into GE General Counsel, let alone some small little that way. So that's been the training model, is really law school and law firms. And then a small percentage of those people stay at a law firm, right? But I think over 50% of associates hive off to some other job afterwards. And so that's part of their training. It's like a residency. It's like a post, graduate work there. And yet, you yourself are singularly responsible for eliminating some of the need for what those associates are doing, and all the other AI out there promises to deliver great value by saying a lot of this it's sort of grunt work, but it's high level grunt work. I don't mean just document review. That's long ago been shipped overseas to sort of human AI at the time, and now we can do that in house. So I'm talking about even memo writing, motion practice, not just document review, but risk review, lots of stuff that associates get trained to do in the first 3 to 4 years of their career. Am I right that within the next decade, conservatively, maybe a lot sooner than that, the portfolio of the incoming associate will be very different? And if so, are they going to be missing training that they need otherwise, and there'll be no gap filler? How will just that beginning part of legal education be transformed by AI?
Yeah, well, I think the technology's evolving much more quickly than we can sort of wrap our head around. And I think some of these institutions are going to take some time to adapt. That said, again, I'm actually very optimistic and excited for everyone in this room for a couple of reasons. One, this concept of unlearning is something that I've really seen emerge, not only as you transition from a law firm to in-house, but actually as you transition from a non-AI native practice to an AI native practice. We've seen the people, and not even just in the legal field, even our software developers, the ones who've had the hardest time accepting that Cursor or Claude Code can now write all their code, are the ones that are actually the more experienced ones. The ones who just graduated or have never done anything else are really excited about it, and they're like, wow, I can create 10x the number of products in the same year that I would have previously created one. This is great. So I think there's a great opportunity, if you don't have anything to unlearn, to actually learn how to incorporate AI into what you're doing. And the really sort of slightly odd thing here is, typically with the apprentice type of model, which I really believe in, I think there are a lot of experienced people who have a ton of wisdom and judgment that everyone should try to learn from if they can. But here, I at least if it was me, I'd almost think about it as like two categories of mentors or teachers. The ones who have been the rainmakers of the law firm that can teach you what does it mean to be a great lawyer. And that's definitely a very, very valuable thing to learn in law school. Obviously teaches you that. Even the normal training of a law firm teaches you that. But the other category that paradoxically you might even be within like 3 months better than anyone at the firm at, if you put your mind to it, is actually how to actually utilize AI effectively, right? You don't need to know how to actually write code in any traditional sense to be able to take advantage of this technology. And there's an incredible opportunity. And what I'm seeing is, whether you're in-house or a law firm, the middle management layer is going to be in a really hard spot in a way that the people who are just coming into the profession, I think, actually have a unique opportunity to make a name for themselves. Because if you're actually one of the rare people who figures out how to take advantage of this technology, you're going to find yourself in a very good position, because everyone's desperate to figure it out. But the older, more experienced people have as much to unlearn as they have to learn, whereas you only have things to learn. So it's actually a faster rate of, I would say, acceleration to figure out how to take advantage of the technology. I think the other thing is, I really think in the arc of human history, it's not like that long that the way to get trained is to drown in emails to do document review or an M&A data room to summarize contracts. Like, it's quite recent in the arc of history. I think the problem is it's now been like almost 2 generations where the way you get trained as a lawyer or as a knowledge worker or investment banker, et cetera, is to kind of do a lot of grunt work, maybe 5% of which is actually really valuable and 95% of which is not. So where I see a lot of opportunity too is, and Megan Ma at Stanford, we've been collaborating a little bit, but she's been doing some really interesting research around how do you actually take one of the world's best experts. If you want to be an M&A attorney, get one of the world's best M&A lawyers, create an AI agent version of that lawyer, and imagine one law student graduates and spends 8 hours a day being mentored by that AI agent, going through every edge case, thinking about what actually happens if you had unlimited access to that expert, and then someone else is doing a year's worth of summarizing contracts manually in the data room. I have a feeling, the first one's going to be a lot more appealing to anybody.
On that model, is the advice master the use of existing AI or become an entrepreneur with respect to AI?
I don't think you have to become an entrepreneur, and I'd actually caution against. I mean, I think it's obviously you do learn a lot, but there's also a huge amount of risk as well. I think just simply like there's like literally probably like 10 people that I keep hearing about, like 10 lawyers in the world that are now making a name for themselves because they've been vibe coding within a large law firm, and like the rest of the legal world can't believe it because they almost feel like it's impossible for me to learn how to even vibe code. And vibe coding is not hard. You can literally lock yourself in a room this weekend, and I almost guarantee you can vibe code some kind of legal product for yourself now with access to these tools. So it really is like accessible. It just takes a level of agency. And I think that is, the one thing that I wish was taught a bit more in like looking back on it, right? Like I had to kind of self-teach myself a lot of things. Obviously I got a lot of value out of these programs, but I think that's for anyone who's Ivy League sort of educated and been going through the motions of from the time you're young, using grades and some version of memorizing things and regurgitating them as your demonstration of your intelligence. I think that can be not the best proxy for what I'm now talking about, which is a level of, it's not becoming an entrepreneur, but it is learning how to be really curious, being comfortable, being uncomfortable, throwing yourself in a situation where you're actually trying to find patterns from one thing and applying it to another. Like it can really be taught, or at least you can teach yourself this if you can't figure out a way to find the resources. But I think that's something that it's unbelievable what can be done in 1 week, I would say. So it's not like a long time period to figure out how to achieve some of those skills.
So you've gone to law school.
Yeah.
That was 10 years ago. It hasn't changed dramatically. During my time in law school was when the computer databases came online. So I was there. I'm so ancient that I was there when Lexis and Westlaw were coming on, and we used to be in the library with cards and stuff. And the old lawyers were saying this newfangled crap, is not going anywhere. And 2 years later, there was no such thing except for so you had to learn to do Boolean searches and so forth. And but it was still very much like what we're teaching in law school and what we expect a lawyer to be able to do is the same thing. You might be moving from a horse and buggy to a car, but you're still driving. And this is a better way to drive. So now learn the car and drive. But what you're doing is the same. And listening to you, it sounds to me like what it is to be a lawyer might be fundamentally different. And that is, it's not sort of law, I'm still going to be a lawyer, and then there'll be this technology that'll make it easier for me. It's like, no, what it is to be a lawyer now is actually morphing in a fundamental way that accomplished lawyers may actually be disadvantaged at because they can't get their mind around it's not the same thing anymore. I think of the quintessential value of a lawyer is the understanding of legal reasoning and legal authority. You can't understand legal risk. You can't understand how to structure transactions. You can't litigate. You can't negotiate unless you understand what legal reasoning is. And you know how to do that. You're a trained lawyer. Will law schools still have to provide that? And is that still something you would need to use the AI? And down the road, will AI do all the legal reasoning so we don't even have to think about it anymore? Or do we still need to be fluent in legal reasoning?
Great question. I don't have a perfect answer. I personally think there's an incredible amount of value in that and should always be taught. And if you look even, Oliver Wendell Holmes, I mean, a lot of his quotes, even back then, were basically all about how, what is the law, but basically statistics. And so on some level, there's a lot of power to, at a minimum, and again, you can use AI to augment your own education, but I think learning the fundamental critical thinking, legal reasoning skills. And I still think even in the long run, there's going to be some percentage of lawyers. I think even now, if you look at law firm partners, people who make partner, I have no idea what the percentage is, but it wouldn't surprise me if 10 to 20% are just excellent lawyers by the traditional definition. And you're the world's best person when it comes to tax law, and anybody in the world who needs to understand tax law should go to you because you're the best person. I wouldn't be surprised if 80% are actually very good at bringing in business. And that's actually not necessarily a mastery of the law. It's actually a mastery of several other things. And having enough fluency in the law is a prerequisite to be able to have that job and to do that. So I think what you're probably going to see is some continuation of that 10 to 20% where maybe AI actually enhances your ability to more quickly understand the nuances of Brazilian tax law versus US tax law because you have the fundamentals down. Now it's about the speed at which you can actually learn starts to go up. But for the 80%, one of the most interesting experiences I've had in my career was actually pretty recently, where it goes back to this litigation example I gave earlier about gaining a competitive advantage. But we had the opportunity to sit down. We were working with a customer on a bet the company litigation. And in these situations, money's no object. They literally would hire unlimited lawyers and pay unlimited money to be able to win this case, which I mean, there was constraints on time, so therefore they couldn't spend unlimited money. But money was no object. And we had the opportunity to sit down with, and I personally got to know probably one of the top 3 litigators in the world. This is somebody who's a law firm partner making crazy amounts of money because they win every case they've ever been on. And it was really fascinating to basically, with this person's consent, download the brain of this expert. And the way that he went about ultimately winning this litigation was different than, I would argue, like 99% of other litigators. And really, what it came down to is, to use like the legal language, the equities of the case versus the law, and recognizing that at the end of the day, there's either going to be a jury, a panel of arbitrators, a judge, somebody who you're ultimately persuading. And so actually it's more about how do you deeply understand the art of persuasion and really understanding the human side of this and behavioral economics. And I mean, I was reading a lot of Robert Cialdini and using our AI to help kind of to take some of these principles and actually work with him to then augment his own ability to go through, again, like years and years worth of voluminous amounts of data. But it was a really interesting example because I think it kind of signals there's actually, to your point, I don't know if it's being what that the definition of a lawyer changes. I actually believe the greatest thinkers we have do operate quite differently. And so one of the best opportunities for AI is to actually begin to understand this undocumented knowledge. And I believe everyone has an algorithm that they use. We just don't spend enough time actually codifying it. Many people see it as their competitive advantage. They don't want to share it, right? But this person was at retirement age. He was going to write a book. He actually instead loves the fact that we're now building this brain that's utilizing his intuition so that it can actually help more clients. But I think we're going to see a really interesting opportunity to scale the judgment of experts. And in that sense, it's more creating more lawyers like that top 1% as opposed to the 99% who have basically just been practicing work that's now largely commoditized.
So let me just transition to my last question here.
As Jody transitions to a last question, maybe if it could be brief so that students could also prepare a few questions. I mean, yeah, go ahead, Jody.
Yeah, so speaking of it's a perfect transition to my last question, which is, what makes this litigator so great is that they know how to persuade the adjudicator, the adjudicating body. I myself am an arbitrator, the American Association of Arbitration, and I work with judges, and it is certainly a conception of adjudication that humans are essential. Yet, if you're saying that a lot of the law work it can be done better and faster through AI, do you think there'll come a point, and speaking of trust, where in fact the adjudication is improved if it's taken over completely by AI? And I'll just note that AAA tells us arbitrators don't do it. It's unethical. There's ethical professional rules of ethical responsibility that say, do not go in the back room, shove those documents, which you can do with a scanner, just get thousands of documents, shove it in there, give it the issues, and have it spit out, an award for you, which you can do. Very tempting, right? And they don't want to do it, but at some point you might say it's malpractice not to do that. So what do you think about the perception that a human's essential in adjudication? And at that point, is your guy's algorithm relevant?
Yeah, it's a great question. The reality is humans hold AI to a far higher standard than other humans. And if you actually look objectively, I mean, there's been all kinds of research around what the judge ate that day or the time that they're actually making a ruling. I mean, there's really a lot of flaws with humans doing this work without AI. I think at the same time, living in a dystopian world where AI is making judgments and may also have its own biases is also problematic. So I don't think there's a perfect answer, but I do think some version of the human utilizing AI, like one of the other favorite projects I did with my last company was we actually used AI to help the chief diversity officer of a law firm identify unconscious bias in performance reviews. They had a problem with the law firm where, despite their best efforts and despite a lot of diversity in the incoming 1L class, by the time you get to partner, there's a overwhelming number of kind of straight white males that made it to partner, and so they really wanted to solve that problem. And we took a lot of the research and social science around unconscious bias, and one of the learnings was that when there's a lot of personality-based feedback as opposed to performance-based feedback, that can be an indicator of unconscious bias. So we basically took that research and then said, okay, great, we have hundreds of performance reviews. Let's overlay that with demographic characteristics and have the AI tell us whether or not there are any patterns here that are worth paying attention to. And what it found is, even though, for example, women at this firm were actually getting much higher scores on their overall performance, a much higher percentage of it was personality-based. She's so bubbly and cheerful. I love working with her. Whereas the men would say, you did a terrible job in this memo. It didn't have an introduction. It would give very kind of actionable feedback, which someone could actually do something with and improve. And so I think there's probably some opportunity where if we have the right usage of AI, it can uncheck some of the biases that humans have. And I think in the near future, if nothing else, given the trust that we have in other humans, it's probably going to be better to have a human with AI versus either a human without AI or AI without a human.
Great, thank you. So, okay, many questions. So maybe you can start in the front, yeah, and then you go.
Yeah. For someone coming from a non-technical background and they want to solve a problem, let's say using AI, you mentioned healthcare and law. What do you suggest? Like at the beginning of when you were starting the company, you mentioned you come from a philosophy background. I'm sorry if I'm assuming you might not have had as much technical skills. What is the team dynamics that you have with your co-founder? Do you completely delegate the tech part of it to your co-founder, or do you as a founder spend some time learning about the technical side of things? Like how do you balance the non-tech and technical side? Where should one start with?
Yeah. So, I mean, now that, again, like AI and even coding is becoming so much more accessible, I think less and less, I think more and more the non-technical founder has the ability to do a lot, right? But even 10 years ago, when I was founding my first company, I was headed in your seat. One of the biggest topics is how do you find a technical co-founder? And there's a good blog post, I can't remember who wrote it, but it's something like, you don't find a technical co-founder, you earn one. And the point of it was basically, if you could, like, think about all the things that are needed to be successful in the business, right? You have to essentially find customers, generate revenue, build a product, and arguably coding and selling are probably the two most critical things for a technology company. So if you can do a lot of the work to identify the market, identify the customer, when I raised my last round or first round of Text IQ, we had literally, and this is all before I found a technical co-founder, from doing those interviews, we literally had letters of intent from customers, legally non-binding, saying, hey, I've now spent like 6 hours with this person and I've gone really deep to explain the problem that I have. And if they build a solution, I would literally pay $100,000 for this a year because it's so valuable to me. So there's first of all, I think a lot you can do to de-risk the business and even de-risk the revenue part of it. Now that you have vibe coding, you can also build a website. You can also essentially do like pretty much everything other than maybe like if it's a very technical product, building the actual product. I think if you do that, you'll have a really good chance to kind of both earn the co-founder themselves and also just create a dynamic where you really understand them as much as possible and vice versa.
Other questions? Yeah, so I see in the back. Yeah.
Thank you for your time, Omar. Ryan Chase. So my question is kind of a follow-up to Jody's. I guess one of the biggest concerns among many is accountability. With something like your AI product, and especially when it comes to a point where it's, like Jody said, could be as smart as the best litigator in the world, who's like, if something goes wrong, like the AI hallucinates and a product is not delivered in the way it was intended to, then who is accountable? Like, who do you point the finger towards? And is that something you worry about being with your company?
Yeah, it's a great question. It obviously depends a bit on the setup. I would say to date, we've mainly been giving AI to humans. The humans have the obligation, and I think even some of these now infamous court cases of lawyers relying on AI without double checking it, it's a pretty clear dereliction of duty around, at a minimum, double check the work before you produce it. In a court, and I wouldn't say that's ChatGPT's fault. It's really the lawyer's fault in that case. That said, I do see a huge business opportunity for any company who's willing to take on the liability, and I suspect we're going to see a lot of really interesting trends on the insurance side, because in practice, the risk of that might actually be a lot lower than people think. So I suspect we're going to see markets emerge in a way that they haven't yet around both AI native law firms that are willing to take on the liability, and then also insurance companies that are willing to provide that kind of coverage.
Okay. Last question, maybe, right? So other questions, I guess, in the back of it. Yeah.
Thanks for this panel. I learned a lot today. My question is, if lawyers and litigators can use AI, can the judges use AI? If the answer is no, I think it's an unfair game. But the answer is yes. I'm a little more worried because every model is biased. No model is perfect. How do you deal with the bias behind the model to make it fair? What do you think about this?
Yeah, I should caveat this, which I'm definitely not an expert here. So, I know there's a tremendous amount of activity and interest from the judiciary in general. To my knowledge, there hasn't yet been a approved, sort of like universally approved version of this that judges are using. So I think right now it's more like what Jody is describing, where they probably know it's there. Arguably, they probably even know that it would add value, but the same way that a lot of educational institutions have just banned the use of it, I think we're more in that category.
If they're allowed to look at it. They're just not allowed to like press print and then hand it out as the decision, right? They're not allowed to abdicate responsibility, but theoretically they could print it out, read it through, customize it, approve it, and hand it up. I don't think that's banned.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, even going back, like my last company, did a lot in the e-discovery process. And I think there it's been quite actually established where Judge Peck here in New York was among the first to give rulings that it was okay and acceptable, but as long as you have the statistical kind of backing in place to show this is like 95% accurate with the margin of error of X. And there has been a whole protocol on e-discovery, because I think, at least for, this isn't so much the judiciary, but for private parties, the cost of litigation, the cost of taking any kind of legal action has just become cost prohibitive. And so the opportunity to actually use this to even the playing field is non-trivial.
Yeah, or put differently, it's compared to what?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? You got to worry about that. It's like you can look at AI and say, what about this? What about that? But then the real question is, compared to a human doing it, which either it doesn't get done because it's too expensive or is error prone in other ways. So it's very hard. Very hard.
So maybe as a last question, just what's the life expectancy of the billable hour?
Or are you giving the eulogy already?
Well, we actually did give a eulogy at our conference, but
Oh, really?
that was for theatric effect. I mean, look, I don't necessarily think the billable hour needs to go away. I think and we wrote a manifesto on our website that I'd encourage anyone who's interested to read, but the notion that time equals value, and the $6 trillion professional services industry that's currently still operating under this model of let's package judgment, which used to be a scarce resource, into time and then sell it by the hour, no longer makes any sense. And at a minimum, capitalism is just going to work its way through this industry, where you suddenly have a company like ours who's offering a fixed fee at half the cost and 10x the quality, and the market will move to that. We're already seeing it. So I think the one thing that'll change is for commoditized work that's now automatable. The lifeline for that billable work, I think, is going to be very short. Paradoxically, I actually think, again, for these experts, which may be defined differently, maybe in 1 year, one of you could be one of these experts. Someone who's really an expert, I think there's now a willingness to pay. Like, I predict there's going to be people who get $100,000 an hour in the near future. Everybody can bill by the hour, right? Because some rare knowledge and judgment is becoming so valuable, and as long as you're sort of honest about where that value lies, I think there's a tremendous opportunity, even if it is billed by the hour.
Great. Thank you very much, Omar.
Thank you so much.